I don't care who you are. You don't get to tell me how to do my job." Officer Dale Finch stepped closer, close enough that Gloria Washington could see the thin red lines in the whites of his eyes. She had shown him her license. She had calmly asked him to verify her federal credentials. 90 seconds. That was all it would have taken. "Officer, I'm not telling you how to do your job. I'm giving you the opportunity to do it right," Gloria said, making sure her voice remained respectful. Despite her effort to defuse the situation, Finch grabbed her arm with both hands instead. Her hip cracked against her own bumper. The handcuffs snapped shut behind her back. "Stop resisting!" Finch shouted as he pushed her into the back seat and slammed the door. What Dale Finch didn't know, what would destroy his career, his freedom, and everything he thought that badge protected him from, was exactly who he had just put in that car. Before continuing, comment where in the world you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you can't miss. The cart came out of nowhere. 1 second, Gloria was lifting her last grocery bag into the trunk of her silver Honda CR-V. The next, a runaway cart rolled across the Fresh Mart parking lot and cracked into her rear bumper with a hollow metallic thud. She set the bag down, walked around to the back of the car, crouched low to get a good look at the damage, a shallow scratch, maybe 3 inches long, cutting through the silver paint down to the gray primer beneath. She sighed through her nose. 22 years she'd been shopping at this Fresh Mart. 22 years of Saturday afternoon runs between work weeks that never really ended. She knew where they kept the good avocados. She knew which checkout lanes moved faster. This parking lot was as familiar to her as her own kitchen. She pressed her thumb gently against the scratch and straightened up. It wasn't the end of the world. It was just a scratch. What she didn't know, what she had absolutely no reason to know, was that a woman 40 feet away had already decided that Gloria May Washington was a problem. Her name was Linda Carver. She was standing near a red SUV 2 rows over, reusable bags hanging from both arms, sunglasses pushed up on her head. She was white, late 40s, and she had been watching Gloria since the moment Gloria pulled into the lot. She watched Gloria park, watched her get out, watched her push her cart to the trunk and load her bags. And when that stray cart rolled over, the one that had drifted loose from the cart returned 20 feet away, Gloria had done something completely ordinary. She'd grabbed it by the handle to stop it from rolling further, checked the scratch it left, and then, without thinking, lifted the single abandoned grocery bag sitting in its basket and set it on top of her own bags in the trunk, making room to push the empty cart aside. It was nothing. A reflex. The bag belonged to whoever had left it in that stray cart. Probably someone who'd already driven away and wouldn't even notice it was gone. But Linda Carver noticed. Or at least, that's what she told herself she noticed. She pulled out her phone, tapped 3 numbers. "Yes, hi. I'm at the Fresh Mart on Caldwell Road. There's a woman out here. I just watched her take bags right out of somebody else's shopping cart and put them in her car. She's still out there, standing by a silver car near the entrance." The 911 dispatcher asked for a description. Linda gave one. She said black woman. She said jeans and a jacket. She said right near the entrance, a silver car. She didn't mention that the cart had been abandoned. Didn't mention that it had rolled across the lot on its own. Didn't mention that there was no other car nearby. No other shopper standing there claiming anything was missing. She didn't mention any of that. She hung up, adjusted her sunglasses, and waited. Gloria had already set the stray bag back into the cart. She'd realized within seconds it wasn't hers, just a single box of crackers someone had forgotten. She pushed the cart with the stray bag to the nearest cart return, dusted her hands off, and walked back to her trunk. She took one last look at the scratch. She'd take it to Ray's auto shop on Tuesday. Ray would fix it in 20 minutes and charge her half of what the dealership would. She was thinking about Ray's shop, about the avocados she'd picked. She hoped she hadn't bruised them when she set the bag down. About whether James had remembered to take the chicken out of the freezer for dinner. James, her husband of 24 years, a man who started every Saturday morning by making coffee too strong and reading the paper cover to cover, in order, like it was sacred. She was planning on being home in 20 minutes. They were going to sit on the back porch and do absolutely nothing for the rest of the afternoon. That had been the plan. She pressed the button on her key fob. The CRV beeped softly, and then she heard it. Distant at first, then closer, then very close. A siren. She turned toward the sound out of habit. 2 patrol cars rolled into the Fresh Mart lot with their lights cycling. Not screaming, just flashing. The quiet kind. The kind that said, "We're not rushing because we've already decided." Gloria stood next to her car and watched them come. She wasn't afraid. Not yet. This was Claremont. She'd lived here for over 2 decades. She knew half the people who worked in this city's courthouse. She knew the mayor by first name. She was, on any given weekday, one of the most powerful people in this county. But she was also a 50-year-old black woman standing in a parking lot in jeans and a fleece jacket with a scratch on her bumper. And the 2 officers who stepped out of those patrol cars had already decided what they were looking at before they'd taken a single step in her direction. She could tell by the way they moved. She could tell by the way they looked at her. She had spent 18 years reading people from a bench. And what she read right now, in the way Officer Dale Finch squared his shoulders and set his jaw as he walked toward her, was that this was going to go badly. She just didn't know how badly yet. Officer Dale Finch didn't ask a single question before he started talking. That was the first thing Gloria noticed. He climbed out of the patrol car, hitched up his belt, and walked toward her like he'd already written the report in his head. Like this was already over. His partner, younger, quieter, eyes hidden behind aviator sunglasses, followed 2 steps behind. Finch was broad-shouldered, mid-30s, with the kind of square jaw that probably looked good on a department website. He stopped 6 feet away from Gloria and crossed his arms. "Ma'am, step away from the vehicle." Not hello. Not is everything okay? Nor can I ask what's going on. Just step away from the vehicle. Gloria straightened slowly. She looked at him the way she looked at attorneys who wasted her courtroom's time. Steady, patient, measuring. "This is my vehicle, officer." "I said step away." "I heard you." She didn't move. "I'm telling you, this is my car. I've been shopping here for 22 years. I can show you my receipt if—" "I don't need your receipt. I need you to step away from the vehicle and keep your hands where I can see them. Right now." Around them, the parking lot had started to slow down. A woman with a toddler on her hip stopped walking. A teenage boy near the cart return lifted his phone. Gloria took 1 calm step to the side, away from the car, as instructed, and kept her hands visible. She had done nothing wrong. She knew that. What mattered now was making sure this man knew it too. "My name is Gloria Washington," she said, clearly, evenly. "I'd like to show you my identification." "Go ahead." Slowly. She reached into her jacket pocket, deliberately, carefully, and produced her driver's license. She held it out. Finch snatched it from her fingers and looked at it the way people look at junk mail. A glance. Maybe 2 seconds. He flicked it back at her. It hit her chest and fell toward the ground. She caught it with one hand. "You got a problem with that cart over there?" "A stray cart hit my bumper. I moved it to the return." "Uh-huh." He rocked back on his heels, lips pressed flat. "And those bags in the trunk?" "My groceries. I just came from inside. Somebody says they watched you stealing bags out of another customer's cart. I picked up a box of crackers that was sitting in the stray cart. I set it back down when I realized it wasn't mine. It's still in the cart return right over there if you'd like to." "So you're admitting you put your hands on someone else's property?" His voice sharpened. "That's theft, sweetheart." The word landed like a slap. Gloria's eyes didn't flinch. "Do not call me sweetheart." Finch stepped closer. Close enough that she could see the thin red lines in the whites of his eyes. "I'll call you whatever I want, until you give me a reason not to. Right now, all I see is a woman with somebody else's groceries and a whole lot of attitude. "Officer," she kept her voice iron steady, "I am a United States Federal District Court judge. I am asking you, I am formally requesting, that you run my credentials through the federal database before this goes any further. It takes 90 seconds. The parking lot went completely still. Finch stared at her. Then he laughed, short and sharp, like she'd told a bad joke. He turned to Corsten. "You hear that, Travis? We got ourselves a federal judge." He turned back, the laugh already gone, replaced by something colder. "Lady, I don't care who you are. You don't get to stand here and tell me how to do my job. I'm not telling you how to do your job. I'm giving you the opportunity to do it correctly. Last warning." His voice dropped low and hard. "Turn around. Hands behind your back. I will not. I have done nothing." He didn't wait for her to finish. Finch lunged forward and grabbed her arm with both hands, spinning her roughly toward the car. Her hips slammed into the bumper. She gasped, not from fear, but from the pure shock of the impact. Corsten was on her other side instantly, wrenching her second arm back before she could process what was happening. "Don't resist!" Finch barked, loud enough for the whole parking lot to hear, loud enough for the cameras. "Stop resisting!" "I am not resisting." Her voice cracked for the first time, not with tears, but with disbelief. "I am not resisting." Her cheek was inches from the roof of her own car. She could see her distorted reflection in the silver paint. Arms wrenched behind her, 2 officers pressing their full weight against her like she was dangerous, like she was something to be contained. The handcuffs snapped shut. The click of the metal was the loudest sound she had ever heard. She didn't crumble. She pulled herself upright as much as they would allow, squared her shoulders, and kept her chin up as they marched her across the parking lot. Her shoes scraped against the asphalt. People were frozen in place. Carts abandoned mid-push. Car doors hanging open. Every phone in the lot was raised. Finch's hand shoved her head down as he pushed her into the back of the patrol car. The door slammed. Through the window, she could see her trunk. Still open. Her groceries are still sitting there, bags leaning against each other in the afternoon sun. She had been gone less than 8 minutes. Nobody spoke on the drive to the station. Gloria sat in the back of the patrol car with her hands pinned behind her and watched Claremont pass through the window. The Saturday afternoon streets were quiet. Families walking dogs, kids on bikes, a man washing his car in a driveway, radio going. Normal life, moving along without her. Finch drove. Corsten rode passenger. Neither of them looked back once. She focused on her breathing. In through the nose, out through the mouth. She had presided over murder trials without flinching. She had sentenced men twice her size to decades in prison and never let her voice waver. She was not going to fall apart in the back of a patrol car over a box of crackers she had already put back. But her wrists ached where the cuffs bit into them, and the seat smelled like sweat and old coffee, and she could not stop seeing Finch's hand on the back of her head, pushing her down, into the car, like she was nothing, like she was nothing. She pressed that thought down hard and locked it away. She would deal with it later. Right now, she needs to be precise. Little did they know several videos about the incident were posted online. 3 of them, shot from 3 different angles by 3 different people who had been standing in that lot with their phones raised and their mouths open. The clearest one, posted by the teenage boy from the cart return, showed everything. Gloria presenting her license. Finch flicking it back at her. The grab, the shove, her cheek inches from the roof of her own car. The handcuffs clicking shut. The open trunk with the groceries still inside as the patrol car drove away. That video had 400 shares before Gloria even reached the police station. The Claremont police station was a flat, beige building 2 miles from the Fresh Mart. Finch pulled into the back lot, cut the engine, and opened her door without a word. He walked her through the rear entrance with one hand on her arm. Not gentle, not rough. Just present. Just reminding her he was there. The processing room was fluorescent lit and smelled like burnt coffee and printer toner. A row of plastic chairs lined one wall. A long desk ran the length of the other, staffed by a single officer typing with 2 fingers on a keyboard. He looked up when they came in, looked at Gloria, then looked back at his screen. Finch uncuffed her at the processing desk and dropped her personal items, keys, phone, jacket, into a gray plastic bin without inventory. He told her to sit. She sat. She rubbed her wrists once, slowly, then set her hands flat on her knees and stared straight ahead. Finch settled in at the computer terminal, pulled up the intake screen, typed in her name. She watched him. She watched the exact moment it happened. His fingers slowed on the keyboard, then stopped completely. He leaned forward, just slightly, an inch, maybe 2, and stared at the screen. His neck went stiff. She could see the muscles in his jaw working. He sat like that for 4 full seconds. Then he pushed back from the desk and stood up fast, knocking his rolling chair into the wall behind him. He walked out of the processing room without saying a single word to anyone. Sergeant Eleanor Price came in 2 minutes later. She was a compact woman, early 50s, with close-cropped gray hair and the careful, measured walk of someone who had spent 20 years learning when to move fast and when to move slow. She was carrying a paper coffee cup, and she set it down on the corner of the desk when she saw Gloria. She looked at the screen, read what was on it, read it again. Then she looked at Gloria, really looked at her, and something moved across her face. Not quite shame, something heavier than shame. "Ma'am," she said quietly, "I need to ask you to come with me." She led Gloria down a short hallway and into a small private office, a supervisor's room, plain desk, 2 chairs, a window with the blinds mostly closed. Price gestured to the better chair, the one behind the desk, and waited for Gloria to sit before she spoke again. She set Gloria's gray bin, keys, phone, jacket, on the desk in front of her without being asked. "Can I get you some water?" Gloria looked at her hands in her lap. The red lines from the cuffs were already fading, but she could still feel them. "Please," she said. Price made a phone call from the desk. She spoke quietly, turned slightly away. Gloria caught 3 words clearly. "Call the chief." They waited in near silence for 40 minutes. Price brought the water. She asked once, carefully, if Gloria needed medical attention. Gloria said no. Price nodded and didn't push. At some point, Corsten appeared in the doorway. Just his face, just for a second, looking in. Price saw him and closed the door without a word. Chief Raymond Holloway arrived looking like a man who had been rehearsing his apology in the car the whole way over. He was tall, silver-haired, dressed in weekend clothes, khakis and a button-down, which somehow made the whole thing worse. Like even her humiliation wasn't worth his uniform. He sat across from her, folded his hands on the desk, and smiled the careful smile of a man who had done this before. "Judge Washington, I want to start by saying how deeply sorry I am for the confusion this afternoon." "Confusion?" she repeated. He paused. "This was not a confusion, Chief Holloway." Her voice was quiet, completely controlled. "Your officer looked at my identification and chose not to see it. He was given the opportunity to verify my credentials and chose not to take it. And then he put his hands on me." She let that sit for a moment. "That is not confusion. That is a decision." Holloway's smile didn't disappear. It just got more careful. He spoke for another 10 minutes. He used words like miscommunication and protocol review and internal assessment. He said the department took these matters extremely seriously. He assured her that Officer Finch would be spoken to. He never once said, "This was wrong." He never once said, "This will not happen again." He never once said anything that cost him a single thing. Gloria listened to every word. When he finished, she stood up, smoothed the front of her jacket, and looked at him with the same steady expression she wore when she'd already made her ruling, and was simply waiting for the room to catch up. "Thank you for your time," she said. I'd like my belongings back now. She paused at the door. And Chief, I'd like my groceries. James Washington, Gloria's husband of 24 years, a retired high school principal with steady hands and a quieter heart than most men she'd ever known, heard the car pull into the driveway and was at the front door before she reached the porch steps. He had seen the videos an hour ago. 3 different people had sent them to him. First his sister, then a former colleague from the school district, then a number he didn't recognize, just a text with a link and no words attached, like whoever sent it couldn't think of a single thing to say. He had watched all 3 clips back to back, sitting in the kitchen with his coffee going cold beside him. He watched his wife's arms get wrenched behind her back. He watched a grown man shove her head down into the back of a patrol car. He watched the trunk of her silver CR-V sitting open in the background, groceries still inside, while they drove her away. He had stayed in that chair for a long time after. Now he stood in the doorway and looked at her. Really looked at her. Scanning for damage the way parents scan children who've taken a fall. Her jacket was wrinkled. Her eyes were steady. She was carrying her grocery bags in both hands like she was determined to finish what she'd started. He took the bags from her without a word. She walked inside. He closed the door behind her. They sat at the kitchen table the way they always sat. Him closest to the stove. Her facing the window that looked out over the backyard. He made coffee. Too strong, the way he always made it. And she had stopped correcting him about it somewhere around year 3 of their marriage. He set a mug in front of her and sat down. She wrapped both hands around the mug, looked into it. Then she told him everything. She told it the way she delivered rulings, in order, without gaps, without editorializing. The cart hitting the car. Linda Carver on her phone. The patrol cars arriving before she'd even reached for her keys. She told him about Finch's face, that first look, the one that had nothing to do with a stolen grocery bag and everything to do with what she looked like standing next to her own car. She told him about the license he barely glanced at, about the smirk when she said she was a federal judge, about Corsten standing there saying absolutely nothing. James listened. He didn't interrupt. He didn't reach for her hand. He just sat completely still and let her talk, which was the most loving thing he could have done. She told him about the handcuffs, the drive, the processing room and the look on Finch's face when the screen loaded, about Sergeant Price in the private office and the 40 minutes of waiting, about Holloway in his weekend khakis with his rehearsed smile and his words that meant nothing, miscommunication, protocol review, spoken to. She stopped talking. The refrigerator hummed. A lawnmower droned somewhere down the street. James turned his coffee mug in a slow circle on the table. Once. Twice. He did that when he was choosing his words carefully. She knew that habit the way she knew every habit of his. The way you know the sounds of a house you've lived in long enough that silence and noise each mean something different. Did he hurt you? He finally asked. Physically. My wrists, she said. Nothing that won't be gone by tomorrow. He nodded slowly. Something moved through his expression. Something dark and carefully contained. The way a man contains a thing he knows he cannot act on. She had seen that look once before, 20 years ago, when a parent had screamed in his face at a school board meeting and he'd had to stand there and take it because the children were watching. He was taking it now because she was watching. James, I'm fine, he said quietly. I know. She looked out the window at the backyard, the old oak tree, the 2 chairs they kept out there year-round. She thought about the women and men who sat in that back seat every week without federal credentials, without a private office, without a chief who drove over on a Saturday afternoon. She thought about all the people who got Finch's smirk and no sergeant named Price to follow up behind it. She thought about what Holloway had really said, underneath all those careful words, what he'd actually communicated, as clearly as if he'd written it on a piece of paper and handed it to her. This will cost us nothing. She set down her coffee mug. I'm calling Marcus in the morning, she said. It wasn't loud, It wasn't dramatic. It was the same quiet voice she used when she'd already made her decision, and was simply informing the room. James looked at her. Then he nodded once, slow and certain. "Good," he said. Sunday morning came gray and quiet. Gloria was already at the kitchen table when James woke up. Still in her robe, reading glasses on, a legal pad in front of her covered in her small, precise handwriting. She had been up since 5. She had not wasted a single minute of it. At 8 o'clock sharp, she picked up her phone and called Marcus Delray. He answered on the second ring. "I was wondering when you'd call," he said. "I've been watching the videos since last night." "Then you already know," she said. "Tell me anyway." She spoke for 4 minutes without interruption. When she finished, the line was quiet for exactly 3 seconds. "Give me 12 hours, Marcus said. Marcus Delray was not a man who made promises lightly. He was 45 years old, lean and precise, with the kind of focused energy that filled a room without making noise. He had spent 20 years as a civil rights litigator, the kind of work that required equal parts brilliance and stubbornness, because the cases that mattered most were always the ones the other side fought hardest to bury. He had been waiting his whole career for a case this clean. By Monday morning, the lawsuit was filed. $3 million. Civil rights violations. Unlawful detention. Racial discrimination. Excessive force. Violation of constitutional rights under the 4th and 14th Amendments. Named defendants: Officer Dale Finch, Officer Travis Corston, and the city of Claremont, Georgia. Marcus held the press conference on the courthouse steps at 10 o'clock. He stood at a small podium in a dark suit, with the morning sun behind him, and read the filing in a steady, measured voice that left no room for misinterpretation. Gloria stood beside him, back straight, chin level, dressed in a charcoal blazer and dark slacks. No robe, no bench. Just a woman who had been wronged and was doing something about it. The cameras were everywhere. The story exploded before Marcus finished speaking. By noon, it was on every major news network. By mid-afternoon, it was trending nationally. The videos from the Fresh Mart parking lot, the ones that had already spread across the weekend, were now being played on television screens from Georgia to California, frame by frame, with anchors and legal analysts picking apart every second. The mayor's office issued a statement at 2 o'clock. It was 6 sentences long and said nothing. City Hall's phone lines were reported as overloaded by 3. Finch was placed on desk duty by end of business Monday. The department issued a 1-paragraph notice. No apology. No acknowledgement of wrongdoing. Just desk duty pending review. Councilwoman Patricia Okafor called Gloria at 4 in the afternoon. She was 61 years old, sharp-tongued and fearless, and she did not open with pleasantries. "Tell me what you need," she said. "Whatever it is, whatever I can do from where I sit." "Keep the pressure on," Gloria told her. "Don't let them make this quiet." "Baby," Pat said. "Quiet is the last thing this is going to be." For a few bright hours, it felt like justice was simply a matter of time. The evidence was clear. The videos were damning. The lawsuit was solid. The whole country was watching. Then Kent Fairfield walked up to a podium. He appeared on the 5 o'clock news. D.A. Kent Fairfield, 52 years old, silver-haired and smooth, the kind of politician who had learned to say everything and mean nothing. He stood in front of the Claremont County Courthouse, flanked by the president of the police union, a thick-necked man named Gerald Watts, who stared at the cameras like they owed him something. Fairfield gripped both sides of the podium and looked directly into the cameras. "After a thorough review of the incident in question," he said, "this office has determined that the responding officers acted within lawful parameters given the information available to them at the time of the call." He paused. "Let that land. It is our position that any suggestion of wrongdoing on the part of Officers Finch and Corston is not supported by the facts as we understand them. The officers responded to a call, assessed the situation, and acted accordingly." He spoke for 4 more minutes. He discussed protocol. He discussed the difficulty of split-second decisions. He discussed the importance of supporting law enforcement. He never once, not once, used the words Judge Washington. Not her title, not her name, just the individual involved, just the complainant, just nothing. Like stripping her title was its own kind of message. Like he wanted everyone watching to understand exactly how much he thought this woman's dignity was worth. In Marcus's office, Gloria watched the broadcast from a chair in the corner. Her jaw tightened. So that's how they want to do this, she thought. Fine. Tuesday morning arrived cold and sharp. Marcus had Gloria's copy of Fairfield's full statement on the conference table before she even sat down. He had printed it out, double-spaced, and gone through it with a red pen, circling phrases, drawing lines, writing notes in the margins in his tight, angular handwriting. He let her read it first, all of it, every word. She read it twice. He's not trying to win in court, she said, setting it down. He's trying to win in the street. That's exactly right, Marcus said. The statement isn't a legal argument. It's a message. To the department, to the union, to every news outlet that picks it up. He's telling them that this lawsuit has no legs. He's trying to kill the momentum before we ever get in front of a judge. He pulled another document from the folder. And then there's this. The city's legal team had filed a motion to dismiss before 9 o'clock that morning. Not on merit. They didn't have the standing for that, not with the parking lot footage already in public circulation. Instead, they had filed on procedural grounds, citing a technicality in the timeline of the filing and arguing that Gloria had suffered no quantifiable damages, as defined under the applicable statutes. No quantifiable damages. She had been handcuffed in a parking lot, shoved against her own car, driven to a police station, and processed like a criminal in front of a room full of strangers. But she had gone home. She had not been hospitalized. She had not lost her job. And so the city's position, stated in clean, bloodless legal language across 11 pages, was that nothing had really happened to her. They're saying the humiliation doesn't count, Gloria said. That's what they're saying, Marcus confirmed. And they know it won't hold. But delay is a weapon. Every week we spend fighting procedural motions is a week the story gets older. A week the videos get buried deeper in people's feeds. They're betting that if they drag this out long enough, the public pressure fades, and you get tired. Gloria looked at him steadily. Do I seem tired to you? Marcus almost smiled. No, but they don't know you like I do. By Wednesday, the Whisper campaign had started. It began with a local blogger named Craig Phelps, a man with 4,000 followers and a long history of writing favorable pieces about the Claremont Police Department. He published a post that morning titled, The Other Side of the Fresh Mart Story. It was thinly sourced, anonymous quotes, vague references to colleagues who wished to remain unnamed. But the implication was unmistakable, that Gloria Washington had a history of judicial temperament issues, that she had been difficult with officers, that maybe the situation in that parking lot had escalated because of her, not them. By Thursday morning, 2 conservative news outlets had picked it up. Marcus called her when the second one was published. She was already on the bench. She read the articles during her lunch recess, alone in her chambers, door closed. She read them the way she read bad rulings, carefully, completely, looking for every angle. The articles didn't say anything that could be proven false, because they didn't say anything concrete at all. They just asked questions. They just wondered. They just raised concerns. That was the whole strategy. You didn't need facts. You just needed doubt. She returned to the bench at 1 o'clock and presided over her afternoon docket without missing a single beat. A contract dispute, a federal employment case, a sentencing hearing for a man who had made very bad decisions with other people's money. She read every document, asked every relevant question, and delivered every ruling with the same precision she had brought to this courtroom for 18 years. Nobody watching would have known. But when the elevator doors closed at the end of the day, just her, alone, In that small steel box between the 14th floor and the lobby, she looked at her reflection in the brushed metal doors. She looked at the woman staring back at her. The silver hair, the dark blazer, the eyes that had not broken once in 3 days of being poked and prodded and publicly questioned. The city was betting she would fold. Fairfield was betting she would fold. The blogger and his anonymous sources were betting she would fold. She straightened her jacket, picked up her briefcase. The elevator doors opened. She walked out. 1 week after the lawsuit filing, Marcus's investigator delivered a manila folder to his desk. It arrived on a Thursday afternoon, hand-carried by a quiet, methodical man named Roy Briggs, who had spent 15 years digging up things people tried to keep buried. Briggs set the folder on Marcus's desk, tapped it once with 2 fingers, and said, "You're going to want to read that before you do anything else." Then he left. Marcus opened it. He read 1 page. Then he picked up his phone and called Gloria. His voice was different, lower, controlled, the way it got when something mattered. "You need to come in," he said. She arrived at his office 40 minutes later, still in her court clothes. Marcus was standing at the window when she walked in. He didn't sit down. He just picked up the folder from the desk and held it out to her. She took it, sat down, and read. Dale Finch's complaint history went back 9 years. 7 filed complaints. 6 from black residents. 1 from a Latino family on the east side of Claremont. The dates were spread out, not clustered, not all from one bad month. They were distributed across nearly a decade of patrol work, which meant this wasn't a pattern that had slipped through the cracks. Someone had seen it. Someone had chosen to look away. The complaints were all variations on the same story. Stops without cause. Aggressive handling during routine interactions. Dismissive, belittling language. One complainant, a 63-year-old black man named Arthur Sims, described being stopped 3 times in 6 months while walking to the corner store 2 blocks from his house. Each time Finch had demanded ID. Each time Sims had provided it. Each time Finch had held it for 15 minutes before handing it back without explanation. Every single complaint had been dismissed. Every one marked resolved internally or insufficient evidence to proceed. Not one had resulted in formal discipline, not a written warning, not a retraining requirement, nothing. Gloria set the folder down on the desk with great care, the way you set down something fragile. 9 years, she said. 9 years, Marcus confirmed. And nobody stopped him. Nobody stopped him. She was quiet for a moment. This wasn't about me, whatever he thought I was in that parking lot. This was already in him long before I pulled into that lot. Yes, Marcus said. And the department knew it. That's the case. That same evening, Councilwoman Patricia Okafor opened the doors of Mount Calvary Baptist Church on Deering Street to anyone who wanted to come. Word had spread through the neighborhood the way word always spread. Phone calls, front porches, church groups, the barber shop on 5th. By 7 o'clock, the pews were full. People were standing along the walls. The ceiling fans pushed warm air around a room packed with people who had things to say and had been waiting for a room to say them in. Gloria sat in the very back row. She had not announced she was coming. She was in plain clothes, dark jacket, no jewelry, and she brought a notepad and a pen. She did not speak. She listened. An elderly man named Arthur Sims, the same man from the complaint file, though Gloria didn't know that yet, stood up near the front and described being stopped 3 times in 6 months on his way to the corner store. His voice was steady, but his hands gripped the pew in front of him. "I'm 63 years old," he said. "I've lived on that street for 31 years, and every time that man pulled up beside me, I felt like a criminal standing in front of my own life." A woman in her 40s described calling the police after her car was broken into, only to have Finch spend 20 minutes questioning her instead of writing the report. A mother described her 17-year-old son being followed through the Fresh Mart, the same Fresh Mart, by a store security guard who had called Finch directly. Her son had been buying notebook paper for school. Story after story. Voice after voice. The same officer, the same pattern. The same deliberate, practiced cruelty dressed up in a badge. Gloria filled 4 pages of her notepad. On the drive home, James reached over and put his hand on hers. She looked down at the notepad on her lap. All those names. All those years. This was never just about me, she said. James kept his hand where it was. No, he said quietly. It never was. Finch arrived 12 minutes late. That was the first thing. He walked into Marcus Del Rey's conference room on a Tuesday morning with his union attorney, a broad, red-faced man named Gerald Watts, and he didn't apologize for the time. He just pulled out a chair, dropped into it like he owned the furniture, and looked around the room with the easy, unhurried confidence of a man who had never once faced a consequence he couldn't walk away from. He was in civilian clothes, dark jeans, a collared shirt. No badge, no uniform, but he carried himself like he was still wearing both. Gloria was not in the room. Marcus had advised against it. Not because she couldn't handle it, but because he didn't want Finch performing for an audience. He wanted him to be comfortable. Comfortable people made mistakes. Marcus sat across the table, a single legal pad in front of him, and said, "Let's begin." For the first 30 minutes, Finch was smooth. He answered questions in short, flat sentences. Yes, no, that's correct. I don't recall. He had clearly been coached. Watts sat beside him with his arms folded, jumping in with objections that were more about rhythm than law, breaking Marcus's pace, giving Finch time to think. It didn't work. Marcus moved slowly, methodically, the way a man dismantles a wall, not by attacking it all at once, but by removing one brick at a time until the whole thing was standing on nothing. "Walk me through the timeline," Marcus said. "From the moment you received the dispatch call to the moment you initiated physical contact with Judge Washington." Finch walked through it. 2 minutes and 40 seconds from dispatch to arrival. Observed the subject near a silver vehicle. Approached. Requested identification. "And when you received the identification," Marcus said, "what did you do with it?" "I looked at it." "For how long?" "Long enough." "Approximately." Finch shifted in his seat. "A few seconds." "In your incident report," Marcus said, sliding a document across the table, "you stated that you examined the identification and found it, and I'm quoting directly here, insufficient to verify the subject's claimed identity. Do you see that?" Finch looked at the report. "Yes, but your department's own protocol states that any identification presenting a federal government title must be cross-referenced with the Federal Credentials Database before an arrest is initiated. Were you aware of that protocol?" "I use my judgment in the field." "That's not what I asked." Marcus's voice didn't change. Not harder, not softer, just precise. "Were you aware of the protocol?" A pause. "Yes." "And you chose not to follow it." Watts leaned forward. "Objection. Argumentative." "I'll rephrase," Marcus said pleasantly. "Did you access the Federal Credentials Database before initiating physical contact with Judge Washington?" "No." "Why not?" "The situation required immediate action." "What situation?" Marcus opened his hands. She was standing next to her car. She had provided identification. She was not raising her voice. She was not moving toward you. What specifically required immediate action? Finch's jaw tightened. She was being non-compliant. She asked you to verify her credentials. She was interfering with a lawful investigation. Into what? Marcus tilted his head. By the time you arrived, the individual who made the 911 call had already left the parking lot. There was no stolen property. There was no victim present. There was no crime in progress. What exactly were you investigating? The room went very quiet. Then Marcus reached under the table and produced a laptop. He turned it to face Finch and pressed play. The parking lot footage was crisp and wide, pulled from Freshmart's corporate security system through a subpoena that had bypassed the local store entirely. It showed everything. The stray cart, Gloria crouches at her bumper. Gloria, presenting her license. Finch glancing at it for less than 2 seconds. Finch grabbing her arm before a single verification step had been taken. Finch watched the screen. His attorney watched the screen. Nobody in the room said anything for a long moment. "This footage," Marcus said quietly, "contradicts your incident report in 3 specific places. Would you like to walk through them one at a time, or all at once?" Watts called for a recess. As everyone pushed back from the table and stood, Finch leaned close to his attorney and said something low, almost under his breath. He was smiling, that same small, knowing smile from the parking lot, like he still believed none of this could actually touch him. Marcus watched him go, said nothing. He picked up his legal pad and wrote one word in the margin, pressing down hard with the pen. Obstruction. He circled it twice. The ruling arrived on a Friday morning, 3 days after the deposition. Marcus's assistant brought it to his desk at 8:47 a.m. A sealed envelope from the federal court, standard issue, nothing about it from the outside that suggested the damage it contained. Marcus opened it with a letter opener, unfolded the single document inside, and read it standing up. He read it twice. Then he set it down, walked to his window, and stood there looking out at the street below for a long moment before he picked up his phone. The judge assigned to the civil case was the Honorable William Tate, 71 years old, appointed 19 years ago, a man whose courtroom had a reputation for moving slowly and ruling conservatively. Marcus had flagged him as a risk from the beginning. He had said as much to Gloria 3 weeks ago, and she had noted it without comment. Now the risk had materialized. Judge Tate had granted the city's motion. Not the motion to dismiss. That had been denied, at least. But a secondary evidentiary motion that the city's attorneys had slipped in quietly during the procedural back and forth. A motion to exclude Dale Finch's prior complaint history from trial on the grounds of relevance. 7 complaints, 9 years, 6 black residents, 1 Latino family, gone. The ruling stated, in clean and careful legal language, that the prior complaints against Officer Finch constituted prejudicial character evidence that does not directly bear on the specific incident under litigation. It was the kind of language that looked reasonable on paper and was devastating in practice. Without that complaint history, the systemic discrimination argument, the spine of the entire case, had nothing to stand on. Finch's behavior in that parking lot would be tried as an isolated incident. One bad day, one misunderstanding. No pattern, no history, no context. Marcus filed an immediate objection. It was denied within 4 hours. 4 hours. On a Friday afternoon. Marcus had been practicing law for 20 years, and he had never seen a motion denied that fast. Somebody had made a call. He was still at his desk at 6 p.m. when his phone rang. It was a journalist named Sandra Osei from the Claremont Courier. Sharp, careful, someone Marcus had dealt with before and trusted. "I need to ask you about something off the record first," she said. "Go ahead." "The evidentiary ruling. Did your office receive the official copy before it was published?" Marcus went still. "When was it published?" The city's communications director sent a press release about it at 2:45 p.m. "I have the timestamp." Marcus looked at the envelope on his desk. His assistant had brought it to him at 8:47 in the morning. But that was the general filing notification. The full ruling text, with Tate's signature, had arrived in his official case portal at 3:12 p.m., 27 minutes after the city's press release. "No," Marcus said slowly. "We did not." Sandra was quiet for a moment. "There's something else. I've been making calls this afternoon. 2 sources, both reliable, both inside the department, are telling me that D.A. Fairfield has been in contact with Judge Washington's supervising circuit judge. Not formally, informally. Phone calls. He's been suggesting that Gloria's, and I'm quoting what I was told, public involvement in controversy may warrant a review of her judicial conduct." Marcus said nothing. "Marcus, I heard you. Is there anything you want to say on record?" Not yet, he said. But stay close. He hung up, sat in the quiet of his office for a long moment. The city had leaked the ruling to the press before delivering it to the opposing counsel. That was a procedural violation at minimum, an ethical violation at worst. And now Fairfield was making phone calls to the circuit court, not filing anything official, nothing that left a clean paper trail, just quiet suggestions dropped into the right ears. This was not a legal strategy. This was a pressure campaign. And the pressure had one target. He drove to Gloria and James's house that evening. She opened the door before he knocked. She had seen his headlights in the driveway. They sat at the kitchen table, the three of them. Marcus laid it out plainly, the way she had always asked him to. The ruling, the timeline, the leak, Fairfield's phone calls to the circuit court. James sat very still at the end of the table. Gloria listened to every word without moving. When Marcus finished, the kitchen was so quiet he could hear the clock on the wall above the stove. "They're not trying to beat the lawsuit," she said finally. Her voice was low and even. "They're trying to make me choose between my dignity and my bench." James reached across the table and took her hand. Marcus looked at her. "Gloria, I heard you," she said. "All of it." She looked down at James's hand over hers. Then, back up. "Give me until morning." She didn't sleep. Not really. She lay in the dark beside James and listened to the house settle around her. The creak of the oak tree outside, the hum of the refrigerator downstairs, the distant sound of a car passing on the street. Normal sounds. Her house, her life. At 3 a.m, she got up, put on her robe, and went downstairs. She made tea instead of coffee. James's coffee would wake him, and she didn't want company yet. She sat at the kitchen table in the dark, with just the small light above the stove on, both hands wrapped around her mug, and she thought. She thought about the bench. 18 years. She had worked for it the way very few people work for anything, clawing through law school on a partial scholarship, grinding through 12-hour days at a firm that made her feel like a visitor in her own career, fighting for an appointment that 3 people ahead of her had told her she would never get. She had gotten it anyway. She had sat in that courtroom for nearly 2 decades and delivered justice to people who had nowhere else to bring it. The bench was not just a job. It was the whole argument of her life. Proof that the system could work. Proof that a black woman from Claremont, Georgia, could sit at the top of it. And now Kent Fairfield was using it as a leash. She was dressed and at the courthouse by 7:30. Her law clerk, Danny, 24 years old, bright-eyed, the kind of young woman who reminded Gloria of herself 30 years ago, was already at her desk when Gloria walked in. Danny looked up, and then immediately looked back down, the way people do when they don't know where to put their face. She had seen the news about the judicial fitness suggestion. Of course she had. "Good morning, Danny," Gloria said, exactly as she said it every morning. "Good morning, Judge Washington." Danny's voice was careful, gentle. "Your 8:30 moved to 9. Everything else is on schedule." "Thank you." Gloria went into her chambers, set her briefcase down, and stood at the window for a moment looking out at the street below. The city was waking up around her. Delivery trucks, early commuters, a woman walking a dog along the sidewalk across from the courthouse. Ordinary Tuesday morning life. She turned away from the window and got to work. Marcus arrived at noon and they used her lunch hour. He sat across from her desk and laid out the 2 options the way a doctor lays out a diagnosis, clearly, without softening the edges, because she had told him years ago that she never wanted the softened version. Option 1. Settle. Accept a reduced amount. The city had already floated $800,000 through back channels. And walk away. It would be framed as a victory in the press releases. City reaches resolution with judge. Clean. Quiet. Over. "And Finch?" she asked. "Desk duty. Maybe a formal reprimand. Maybe nothing. And the 7 complaints? Stay buried. And every black resident of Claremont who never had a Marcus Del Rey to call?" Marcus said nothing. "Option 2, she said. He leaned forward. We push forward. I file to challenge the evidentiary ruling, we expose the leak to the press, and we go after the Fairfield Circuit Court connection through a formal records request. But Gloria, if Fairfield escalates, if he takes the fitness suggestion from a phone call to something official, then I deal with that when it's in front of me, she said. Not before. Your career. My career is not the point. She said it quietly, but it landed hard. If I fold, what does every officer in this city learn? What does every black woman who can't afford you learn? What does Danny out there learn, sitting 20 feet from a federal judge who decided her own comfort was worth more than the truth? Marcus sat back. The clock on her wall ticked. They picked the wrong woman, she said. They picked someone who has spent 18 years making sure this system means something. I am not going to be the one who teaches them that it doesn't. She opened her desk drawer and took out a single folded piece of paper, the one she had written 3 nights ago at the kitchen table, just for herself. She didn't unfold it, just held it. We don't settle, she said, and I need you to call Sergeant Price. Marcus looked up sharply. She reached out? Last night. She left a message on my personal phone. Gloria set the folded paper down on the desk between them. She said she would like to talk. Eleanor Price arrived alone. No union representative. No department escort. No attorney sitting beside her with a hand on her arm telling her what she could and couldn't say. Just a 53-year-old woman in civilian clothes, gray slacks, a dark blue cardigan, who walked into Marcus Del Rey's law office on a Wednesday morning carrying a sealed envelope, and the particular stillness of someone who had already made their decision and was done second-guessing it. Marcus met her at the door. Gloria was not in the room. They had agreed it was cleaner that way. Price was still an active department employee, with 3 months left until retirement. The last thing either of them needed was for this to look like a coordination between the plaintiff and a witness. Marcus showed Price to the conference room. She sat down, placed the sealed envelope on the table in front of her, and folded her hands over it. Before I start, she said, I want you to know I'm not doing this for the lawsuit. I'm doing this because what I watched happen in that processing room was wrong, and what happened after it was worse. Understood, Marcus said. Take your time. She didn't need time. She had clearly been rehearsing this for days. Price had been the duty sergeant on shift the afternoon Gloria was brought in. She had been at the main desk when Finch ran the intake screen and went rigid. She had seen his face. She had read the screen herself. And she had watched what happened in the minutes that followed with the careful attention of a woman who had spent 20 years noticing things she wasn't supposed to notice. She described Finch's behavior after he left the processing room. Not rattled, not ashamed, not the behavior of a man who understood the gravity of what he had just done. He had walked to the hallway where Corsten was waiting, said something low, and laughed. Not a nervous laugh, a real one. She had been close enough to hear Corsten respond, "You didn't know?" And then Finch had said it. Price recounted it word for word, her voice steady and flat. Finch had said, "Doesn't matter what she is. She was standing in that lot like everybody else." The conference room was very quiet. Marcus wrote it down without looking up from his pad. "And you heard this directly?" "Standing 8 feet away," Price said. "I wrote it in my personal notes that same evening. The date, the time, what was said, and who was present." She tapped the sealed envelope. "It's all in there. Signed and notarized." She wasn't finished. The affidavit also contained something else. Something that turned a case about one bad officer into a case about an entire chain of command. 3 days before the internal investigation concluded, Chief Holloway had called Price directly. Not through official channels. On her personal cell phone, on a Sunday evening, while she was at home with her family. He had been pleasant about it. That was the word she used. Pleasant. He had asked how she was doing. Asked about her retirement plans. And then, in the same easy tone, he had told her that the investigation was going to find that both officers had acted appropriately. and that it would be helpful if her own recollections aligned with that finding. He had not threatened her. He had not raised his voice. He had simply made it very clear, in the way that people in power make things clear without ever saying them directly, that her final 3 months before a full pension would go much more smoothly if she remembered things a certain way. She had said very little on that call. She had hung up, and she had spent the next 2 weeks deciding whether 30 years of service was worth swallowing what she knew. She had decided it wasn't. What he did, Marcus said carefully, constitutes obstruction of an internal investigation. You understand that this affidavit will make that case. I know what it does, Price said. I've known for 2 weeks. She looked at the envelope on the table. Then she looked at Marcus. I have grandchildren, she said quietly. 3 of them. 2 boys and a girl. The oldest one is 9. She paused. I'm not retiring with this inside me. Not when I've got a 9-year-old boy who's going to be walking around in this city in a few years. Marcus nodded. He didn't reach for the envelope immediately. He just let her words sit in the room where they belonged. Thank you, Sergeant Price, he said. She stood, smoothed the front of her cardigan, and picked up her bag. At the door she stopped, turned back. You know what the worst part is? She said. None of this surprised me. That's the worst part. She walked out. Marcus sat alone in the conference room for a long moment. Then he pulled the envelope toward him, opened it carefully, and began to read. The call came 2 days after Price's affidavit. Marcus was at his desk reviewing the emergency motion he was building around Price's testimony when his assistant knocked and leaned in. Attorney on line 2. Says her name is Patricia Wynne. She represents a Diane Finch in a domestic matter. She says it's relevant to your case. Marcus looked up. Put her through. Patricia Wynne was brisk and businesslike, the kind of attorney who didn't use 3 words when 2 would do. She explained in under a minute that her client, Diane Finch, had filed for divorce from Dale Finch 11 days ago. During the financial discovery process, standard in divorce proceedings, her client's forensic accountant had found something that Ms. Wynne believed Marcus Delray would very much want to see. How soon can you meet? Marcus asked. Tomorrow morning, she said, and bring a big table. Patricia Wynne arrived at 9 o'clock sharp with a rolling briefcase and a banker's box. She was a compact woman in her 50s, with reading glasses on a chain around her neck, and the no-nonsense efficiency of someone who had spent decades untangling other people's financial disasters. She set the banker's box on Marcus's conference table and began laying out documents in a sequence that told a story. Oldest on the left, most recent on the right, a paper timeline that stretched nearly the full length of the table. 4 years ago, she began, Dale Finch opened a secondary bank account at a credit union in Marietta. Not Claremont, Marietta, 40 minutes away. She pointed to the first document, an account opening form. The account was never mentioned in any of his financial disclosures. His wife didn't know it existed until our forensic accountant found it 3 weeks ago. She moved to the next document. Over the past 4 years, that account received 43 separate cash deposits. Regular, consistent. The amounts varied, sometimes $2,000, sometimes $5,000, once as high as $12,000. Total over the 4-year period, $183,000. Marcus studied the deposit records. Source? Traced through 3 companies. Wynne pulled another document. All 3 ultimately connect to a single beneficial owner. A man named Roy Strand. Marcus went still. Roy Strand was 56 years old and had been a fixture in Claremont's real estate development scene for over a decade. He built affordable housing complexes, or what he called affordable housing, primarily in the city's predominantly black neighborhoods on the east side. He had 3 active developments currently under construction, and 2 more in the planning stages. He also had a file at the State Housing Authority containing 11 discrimination complaints filed over the past 6 years, residents being pushed out of rental properties through selective lease non-renewals, code enforcement complaints being filed against long-term black homeowners, in blocks adjacent to his development sites. Noise complaints, loitering complaints, trespassing reports, all called in to the same police precinct, all routed through the same dispatch channel, all responded to, with remarkable consistency, by Officer Dale Finch. Finch had been Strand's private enforcement arm, dressed in a city uniform, paid with city resources, and then paid again, in cash, 43 times, through a credit union 40 minutes away. "There's one more thing," Wynne said. She pulled the last document from the box and set it in front of Marcus. It was a copy of a property deed, a house on Caldwell Road, purchased 4 years ago. The owner of the record was Linda Ann Carver. Marcus looked up. "Linda Carver," Wynne said quietly, "is Roy Strand's sister-in-law. She has lived 4 blocks from Fresh Mart for 4 years. The Fresh Mart sits on the corner of a block that Strand has been trying to acquire for a mixed-use development for the past 18 months. He has made 3 offers on properties along that stretch. All 3 times, long-term black residents turned him down." The room was completely silent. Marcus stood back from the table and looked at the full length of documents laid out in front of him. 4 years of deposits, 11 discrimination complaints, 3 failed property offers, 1 911 call from one woman in a parking lot on a Saturday afternoon. "It was never random," he said. Wynne folded her hands. "No, it wasn't. She wasn't just a busybody who called 911. She was his eyes in that parking lot," Wynne said simply. "Whether she knew exactly what she was doing or not, she was his eyes." Marcus pulled out his phone and called Gloria. She answered on the first ring. "I need you and James to come in," he said. "Right now. All of it just changed." Gloria and James arrived at Marcus's office within the hour. Marcus walked them through everything. The secondary account, the 43 deposits, Roy Strand, the shell companies, the 11 discrimination complaints, the 3 failed property offers on Caldwell Road, and finally, the deed. Linda Carver, Strand's sister-in-law, 4 blocks from Fresh Mart. He laid each document in front of them in order, the way Wynne had laid them in front of him, and let the story tell itself. James sat very still through all of it. His hands were flat on the table, and his jaw was set in that contained, careful way Gloria knew meant he was holding something large and heavy behind his eyes. Gloria didn't move either. She read every document completely before moving to the next. When she reached the property deed, when she saw Linda Carver's name and address printed in plain black type, she set it down slowly and looked at the window for a long moment. "He sent her there," she said. "Not a question." "We can't prove he sent her specifically that day," Marcus said carefully, "but she is his sister-in-law. She lives 4 blocks away. And Dale Finch had been his enforcement tool in that neighborhood for 4 years. She called 911 on a black woman in a parking lot," Gloria said. "And that parking lot sits on a block her brother-in-law has been trying to buy." The room was quiet. "What do we do with it?" James asked. Marcus leaned forward. "Everything." They worked through the evening and into the night. Marcus built the emergency motion around 3 pillars: Price's affidavit establishing Holloway's obstruction, the parking lot footage contradicting Finch's incident report, and the financial records connecting Finch directly to Strand. Together, they didn't just support Gloria's lawsuit. They dismantled the city's entire defense. This was no longer one officer making a bad call on a Saturday afternoon. This was a documented, compensated arrangement between a police officer and a private developer, enabled by a department that had buried 7 complaints and an internal investigation that had been directed from the top. Marcus filed the emergency motion at 11:47 p.m. Gloria was at the courthouse steps at 9 o'clock the next morning. She had not told Marcus she was going to speak publicly. She had not prepared remarks. She had the one folded page she had written at her kitchen table 2 weeks ago, the one she had read to herself and locked in her desk drawer. She had retrieved it that morning before leaving the house. She had read it one more time in the car. Then she had folded it back up and put it in her jacket pocket. She didn't need to read it. She just needed to know it was there. The cameras were already assembled. Word had spread the night before that something was coming. Marcus's emergency filing had hit the public court record at midnight, and 3 journalists had called her office before 8 a.m. She had not returned the calls. She had simply shown up. She stood at the top of the courthouse steps without a podium, without a prepared statement, without Marcus beside her. Just Gloria Washington, in her charcoal blazer, in the morning sun, looking at the cameras with the same steady expression she brought to every hard thing. She spoke for 2 minutes and 14 seconds. She said she had spent 18 years on that bench ensuring that the law meant something, that it applied to everyone equally, regardless of who they were, or what they looked like, or how much money they had. She said she had been handcuffed in a parking lot by an officer who was not just negligent, but who had been operating for 4 years as a paid instrument of someone else's agenda. She said she had been threatened, indirectly but unmistakably, with the loss of her career if she pushed too hard for accountability. She said she was pushing anyway. No one, she said, and her voice didn't waver once, who abuses the power this city gave them should ever be able to make a person choose between their dignity and their livelihood. That is not justice. That is control, and I will not be controlled. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. 17 phones in the crowd were recording. The clip was on every major network by noon. By evening, it had been viewed 11 million times. Not because it was dramatic, because it was true, and people recognized truth the way they recognized cold water. Immediately, completely, in every part of themselves. Marcus was on his 3rd coffee at 6 a.m. the next morning when the court notification arrived. The newly assigned judge, the Honorable Diane Osei, 54 years old, Northern District, a woman whose rulings had a reputation for being thorough and merciless in equal measure, had reviewed the emergency motion overnight. She granted it in full. Every excluded piece of evidence reinstated. Price's affidavit entered into the record. A supplemental order directing the city to preserve all communications between Chief Holloway and any member of the judiciary. Marcus's phone rang 40 minutes later. The city's lead attorney. Her voice was different. Flatter, careful, stripped of the easy confidence it had carried for weeks. "Mr. Del Rey," she said, "my client would like to discuss resolution." Marcus set down his coffee cup, picked up his pen. "I'm listening," he said. Mediation was scheduled for the following Monday. The weekend between was quiet, in the way that the hours before a verdict are quiet. Not peaceful, just still. Gloria went to church with James on Sunday morning. She sat in the 3rd pew from the front, the one they had sat in for 19 years, and she sang the hymns she had known since childhood, and let the familiar words fill up the space inside her that the past 3 weeks had hollowed out. On the way home, James reached over and held her hand the entire drive. She didn't say much, neither did he. There was nothing left to say that hadn't already been said. The work was done. What came next was just the world catching up to it. Monday morning. The mediation suite was on the 12th floor of a neutral office building 6 blocks from the courthouse. A long room with floor-to-ceiling windows, a mahogany table that sat 16, and the particular stale air silence of a space designed for difficult conversations. The city's legal team arrived first. 4 attorneys in dark suits, a paralegal pushing a cart stacked with binders. They arranged themselves along one side of the table with the careful, territorial efficiency of people who wanted to look prepared. Marcus arrived with Gloria and James. He was carrying a single legal pad and a pen. Gloria carried nothing. She sat down across from the city's lead attorney, a woman named Carla Hutchins, early 50s, sharp eyes, who had spent the last 3 weeks being the public face of a defense that was now rubble, and folded her hands on the table. James sat beside Gloria. He was there as her husband, not as a legal party. Marcus had asked him once if he was sure he wanted to be in the room. James had looked at him like the question was barely worth answering. Marcus set the banker's box on the table without opening it. He didn't need to open it. Everyone in the room knew what was inside. Hutchins opened with a number. It was not $3 million. Gloria felt Marcus go still beside her in the particular way he went still when he was about to say something that ended an argument. "Ms. Hutchins," he said, his voice completely level, "I want to make sure we're not going to waste each other's time today. So, let me be direct." He placed one hand on top of the banker's box. "Inside this box is a sworn affidavit from a 20-year department veteran describing Chief Holloway directing the outcome of an internal investigation. There is documented financial evidence connecting Officer Finch to a private developer through 4 years of cash payments totaling over $180,000. There is parking lot surveillance footage that contradicts your officer's incident reports in 3 specific and provable places. And there are records of communications between D.A. Fairfield and a member of the Circuit Judiciary that your client would very much prefer did not become part of the public trial record." He paused. "So I'll ask you again. Is that the number your client wants to lead with today?" The room was silent for a long moment. Hutchins looked at her colleagues. Something passed between them. Not words, just the small, tight-lipped acknowledgement of people who had run out of road. She named a new number. $3,100,000. Gloria did not react. She looked at Hutchins with the same expression she wore when a defendant's attorney tried a last-minute maneuver she had seen 100 times before. Patient, unmoved, already 3 steps ahead. "Plus legal costs," Marcus said. Another pause. Hutchins conferred quietly with the attorney beside her. Then, agreed. The paperwork took 2 hours. Gloria read every page herself, all 41 of them, before she signed anything. Marcus stood beside her. The city's attorneys sat across the table and waited in the particularly uncomfortable silence of people who had been defeated and knew it, and were simply enduring the remaining minutes of it. When Gloria signed the last page, she set the pen down and looked across the table at Carla Hutchins. Hutchins met her eyes, held them for a moment. Then she said, quietly and without performance, "For what it's worth, Judge Washington, I'm sorry." It was the first genuine apology anyone from the city had offered since the parking lot. Gloria looked at her for a long moment. "Make sure your client understands why this happened," she said. "Not just what it cost. Why?" That evening, Gloria and James sat at the kitchen table, the same table where she had said Marcus's name 3 weeks ago, the same 2 mugs, the same window looking out at the oak tree in the fading evening light. She slid a single sheet of paper across the table to James. He read it slowly. His eyes moved line by line, and then stopped near the bottom. He looked up at her. "Every penny?" he said. "Every penny," she said. At the top of the page, in her small, precise handwriting, were 4 words: "The Washington Community Justice Fund." James set the paper down. He pressed his lips together and looked at the table for a moment, the way he did when something was too large for his face to hold all at once. Then he looked up at his wife. The woman he had watched walk out of this house on a Saturday afternoon to buy groceries and come home, changed forever by something that should never have happened. 24 years, he said quietly. "And you still find ways to make me proud." She reached across the table and covered his hand with hers. Outside, the oak tree moved in the evening breeze. The press conference was held on the courthouse steps at 10 o'clock Friday morning. Gloria stood at the podium in her charcoal blazer, not her robe, not yet, with Marcus to her left and Councilwoman Patricia Okafor to her right. James stood just behind her. A crowd had gathered on the steps and along the sidewalk below. Journalists, community members, a cluster of people from Mount Calvary Baptist Church who had driven downtown together in 2 cars. She announced the Washington Community Justice Fund. She explained it simply and plainly, the way she explained everything. The settlement money, all $3,100,000 of it, would be used to provide free legal representation to residents of Claremont who had experienced discriminatory policing and could not afford an attorney. A board would oversee the fund. Marcus had already agreed to serve as lead counsel for the first year without salary. Applications would open within 30 days. She announced the first funded case. The family of Marcus Deal, a 17-year-old boy who had been followed through Fresh Mart by a security guard and falsely reported to police for buying notebook paper. When she finished speaking, the crowd on the steps was quiet for exactly 1 second. Then it wasn't quiet at all. The consequences came quickly after that. They came the way consequences always come, when the evidence is airtight and the cameras are still rolling. Not slowly, not reluctantly, but all at once, like a dam that had been holding too long finally giving way. Dale Finch was terminated from the Claremont Police Department within 48 hours of the settlement. The termination letter cited conduct unbecoming an officer, violation of departmental use of force policy, and conduct prejudicial to the integrity of the department. It was 3 paragraphs long. Everyone who read it understood exactly what it meant. But termination was only the beginning. The financial records connecting Finch to Roy Strand had been referred to the FBI field office in Atlanta. Federal agents had been moving quietly for 2 weeks. Subpoenas, bank records, surveillance, witness interviews. The investigation had been further along than anyone outside that field office knew. On Friday afternoon, 4 hours after Gloria's press conference, 2 FBI agents and a U.S. Marshal walked into the Budget Inn on Route 9, where Dale Finch had been staying since Diane filed for divorce. They knocked on the door of room 114. Finch answered in a t-shirt and sweatpants, a half-eaten sandwich on the table behind him. They arrested him on federal charges, bribery of a public official, civil rights violations under color of law, and conspiracy to commit housing discrimination. 7 counts in total. The U.S. Marshal put the handcuffs on him in the doorway of that motel room while the afternoon sun came through the parking lot behind them. The same handcuffs. The same click of metal. Just a very different parking lot. Finch was processed at the federal building downtown. The same federal building where Gloria Washington had presided over a courtroom for 18 years. He was held without bail, pending a detention hearing, the magistrate citing flight risk and the severity of the federal charges. His police union declined to comment. His attorney, not Gerald Watts, who had quietly withdrawn from the case, but an overworked public defender named Tim Reese, filed a standard objection that went nowhere. Roy Strand was arrested the same afternoon. 2 counts of conspiracy, 1 count of bribery. His 3 pending development applications were permanently revoked by the city. His real estate company filed for bankruptcy protection 6 days later. The police union, the same union that had stood beside Fairfield at his podium 3 weeks ago, issued a single statement. They would not be funding Finch's legal defense. He was on his own. Travis Corsten was suspended without pay, pending a full departmental review. He issued a public statement through his personal attorney that read, in part, "I should have spoken up. I knew what was happening, and I said nothing. I am sorry to Judge Washington and to every person in this community. I failed by staying silent." It was the only apology in this entire story that felt like it came from a real place. Gloria read it once, noted it, and moved on. Silence was always a choice. Corsten had made his. Now he was living with it. Chief Raymond Holloway resigned on Thursday, before the city council could vote, though the vote had been scheduled and the outcome was not in doubt. 7-2. He walked out of the building he had run for 11 years carrying a cardboard box. His pension was placed under review pending the outcome of the obstruction inquiry stemming from Price's affidavit. His attorney told the press he was cooperating fully. Nobody believed him. Kent Fairfield did not resign immediately. But 3 days after the settlement, the Georgia State Bar opened a formal inquiry into his communications with the circuit judiciary. His re-election campaign collapsed within a week. 3 major donors pulled their support publicly. He announced on a Tuesday afternoon that he would not be seeking another term. He made the announcement through his communications director. He did not appear in person. Linda Carver was named in a related civil complaint alongside Strand, filed by Marcus on behalf of 3 long-term black residents of Caldwell Road. The complaint alleged racially motivated harassment and interference with property rights. The following Monday morning, Gloria Washington put on her robe. She drove to the courthouse the way she drove every Monday morning. The same route, the same parking spot, the same elevator to the 14th floor. Danny was already at her desk. She looked up when Gloria walked in, and this time she didn't look away. She smiled, wide and genuine, and a little watery around the edges. "Good morning, Judge Washington." "Good morning, Danny." Gloria set her briefcase down and walked to the window. Below, the city was doing what cities do on Monday mornings: moving, rushing, carrying on. A delivery truck, a woman pushing a stroller, 2 men in hard hats drinking coffee on a tailgate. James was down there somewhere too. He had walked with her from the car to the building entrance and then stopped at the bottom of the courthouse steps. He didn't need to come further. She knew that. He knew that. The steps were hers to climb. Councilwoman Okafor had been there too, standing at the base of the steps with her arms folded and her chin up, the way she stood when she wanted the world to know she wasn't going anywhere. And Marcus Deal, the 17-year-old boy from Freshmart, the first case of the Washington Community Justice Fund, had been standing at the edge of the small group that had gathered, just watching, just bearing witness. Gloria had paused at the top step and turned. She had looked down at all of them: James, Pat, the boy, the small crowd of ordinary people who had shown up on a Monday morning just to see her walk through those doors. She had not raised her hand. She had not smiled for the cameras. She had simply looked at them the way you look at something that matters, fully and without rushing. She had thought, briefly, of Dale Finch, sitting in a federal holding cell 6 blocks away, waiting for a detention hearing before a judge he could not charm, could not dismiss, and could not reduce to a number in a gray bin on a processing desk, waiting for justice to be done to him the way he had done it to others. She had turned and walked inside. Now she stood at her window, her city spread out below her, imperfect, damaged, still figuring itself out, but accountable today in ways it had not been 3 weeks ago. That mattered. That would always matter. Her clerk knocked once. "Your 8:30 is ready, Judge." "Thank you, Danny," she said. "I'll be right there." She turned from the window, picked up her pen, walked toward the courtroom. The door closed behind her. If you enjoyed the story, leave a like to support my channel, and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. On the screen, I have picked 2 special stories just for you. Have a wonderful day.